Welcome to Wildly Capable with Kate, a podcast made for those looking to unleash their wildest capabilities. I'm your host, Kate DeRocher, a dating, relationship, and self-worth coach on a mission to help people build better relationships, starting with the one they have with themselves. In each episode, we'll dig deep, turn inwards, and embark on a transformative journey. Together, we'll break free from unhealthy patterns, rip through self-limiting beliefs, heal past wounds, and build unwavering self-worth, all to create healthier relationships as a result. Get ready to explore the wild, untapped potential within you. Are you ready to see just how wildly capable you are? Subscribe now and join us on this empowering adventure. Remember, your wildest capabilities await. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Wildly Capable with Kate. Thanks so much for tuning in. I am so excited you're here because today I have a very special podcast episode prepared for all of you. Today, I'm going to be joined by coach and creator Zach Watson. Zach teaches people about the idea of mental load in relationships. He offers courses, coaching, training, and he really helps people understand what mental load is, what it looks like, and how it shows up in our relationships. And before I define what mental load is to you, I just want you to know how important it is for your relationship, especially a long-term relationship, to understand this concept of mental load. I've recently been understanding it more and more within my own relationship with my own partner, Bobby, and I can attest to just how important it's been for both of us to really grasp what mental load is. That way, we both can share it more evenly within our relationship. So get excited. I'm so happy you're here because I really think that this episode and understanding and grasping and having knowledge on what mental load is can improve your relationships so much. Okay, before I bring Zach on, I want to break down a little bit about what mental load is so you have a bit of a background before him and I start talking. So mental load refers to the cognitive effort or burden that's associated with managing tasks, responsibilities, and decision-making processes in daily life, especially in relationships. Mental load encompasses a wide range of activities such as planning, organizing, remembering, prioritizing tasks, managing emotions, relationships, personal well-being. It is the invisible work that goes into something, the mental work that goes into something. So we can understand very easily what the physical load is. It's something that you literally have to do with your body to get done. So you know that's taking out the trash, emptying the dishwasher, things like that. But mental load is what goes on kind of behind the scenes of all of that work. It is the thought process, the thinking, the organizing, the planning, the paying attention to details that goes into all of that. So you can't see necessarily when somebody is taking on the mental load, but the person who is taking on the mental load can certainly feel it. And it is so much more draining than we often realize or give credit to. So that's a quick breakdown of mental load. It can show up in various aspects of life. So it can show up in your work, in your household chores, in parenting, and just personal responsibilities. You know, remembering to buy the dogs more dog food when it starts to run out. Or putting the toilet paper roll onto the little toilet paper dispenser in the bathroom when you get to the brown carton part of it. It's little things like that that seem so simple and silly, but when only one person is taking on the mental load of remembering those things, of noticing those details, of planning those details, it can become really taxing, especially when multiple tasks and responsibilities need to be managed at the same time, as they often do. I see clients all the time who tell me that they are so frustrated with dealing with so many aspects of the mental load, while their partner may not be doing the same thing. They may not be picking up things on their end too. And introducing them to what mental load is and how to manage it can be really pivotal for those relationships. It can really help two people better understand each other. It can help the person who's bearing the brunt of the mental load feel so much more heard and seen and cared for. And it can help the person who maybe is less familiar with what the mental load feels like start to actually notice it and take it on more too. to create more balance and harmony and peace within the relationship as a result. So like I said, that's what I want to happen in your relationship too. If you're resonating with anything that I'm saying, if you're in a relationship where maybe the mental load is a little bit mismatched, or you have kids and there's an increased amount of things that goes into that mental load, an increased number of things that you have to be thinking of, if you just moved in with your partner, anything like that where the mental load is shifting or it's becoming too much, I want to really encourage you to listen to this episode, because Zach Watson knows his stuff and he's here to share his wisdom with all of us. I am so excited for you to get to learn from him. Keep listening. Thanks so much for tuning in. Zach, thank you so much for joining today. I feel like I already know you because we've talked so much over Instagram, but I'm so excited that you get to share your wisdom with my audience. I think it's going to be extremely valuable to them. So how about we just start by you sharing just kind of a little background of what mental load is?
I think the best way to probably describe mental load is the thing that keeps you up at night, that you're thinking about in the car, that you're thinking about in the shower, that are not like the fun thoughts, not the fun shower thoughts. So like I know personally, I'm often thinking about like where I want my business to go, what content I want to create. But then there's the other moments that are like, oh shoot, I need to call back this person. Her doctor's appointment got overbooked and I need to do that one again. The trash needs to go out on a different day this week because it's a holiday. Like all those like logistical things that I think, especially, I know a lot of my audience is moms, but I think a lot of women feel a different level of judgment than men. And so they're typically stressing about those things a lot more. Like I was watching the NCAA Women's Championship game the other day, and the Dove commercial comes on, and it says that girls leave sports. I think it said 45% because of the way that they feel like they look in their uniforms. And like, I think that is not an emotional labor weight that a lot of guys feel. I know I was super scrawny in my jersey, and I was like wearing it like a dress at moments, but I don't think I was still excited to put it on because I made the team, more so than feeling self-conscious about the way that I looked.
You didn't feel the pressure to look a certain way and then perform a certain way. That makes sense. That actually kind of leads me to my next question is, since women, and I know speaking in my own relationship, I just tend to see the mental load better than my partner does. I notice the small details. I see the things that need to get done. I realize when we need to restock on paper towels or what have you, when he just maybe doesn't see it the same way I do or as easily. Since that is more traditionally a woman's strength to notice these things, do you think that that then makes handling the mental load the woman's role in the relationship?
I think it defaults to it. I don't think it ought necessarily should be theirs. I think oftentimes, like, so a huge part of what I teach is the fair play method. And they talked about when they were putting it together, they referenced a lot of conversations with couples that were, gay couples. And because they didn't kind of naturally or accidentally fall into these default roles, they ended up having to have really specific conversations like, okay, who's going to manage this thing? Versus like falling into it just by cultural default. So I think that whoever is accidentally falling into these roles, knowing about it, you have the opportunity to have the conversations of who's going to own it fully, and what like a full job kind of looks like. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So it's not that it is the woman's role necessarily, it just may be falling to her. And we can make that role a little bit more evened out, essentially.
Yeah, and I think the hard part, which I teach a lot of the guys that work with me, is to recognize that there is a role at all, like to put a label to it. And then once we identify the label, then we can see, oh, it's been defaulting to your partner. And then when we can see that dynamic, then furthermore, we can say, okay, is that how we want it to go?
Right. What about in the circumstances where, say, it's the man in the relationship who pays for the rent, for the cars, for all the things? Then do you feel like it falls to women more? Because I've spoken to male and female clients who that has been the argument that the man in the relationship has come back with when the woman says, "Hey, I need more help with the mental load." He says, "Well, hey, I'm paying for everything, so you should be doing this."
So the thing that I think about is if you look at your family and your unit as like a company, like, and we're thinking about like money coming in, like that's revenue, that's sales department,
Mm-hmm.
versus, okay, so yeah, sales is super important for like a business to function. And so if she's managing all the other things, she's HR, she's operations, she's fulfillment, she's like all those other roles. And like when you look at the structure of any company and you look at all of the C-suite executive roles, like are they all getting paid the same, or is it just sales as it defaults to CEO and most celebrated? And I think that's a no.
Wow, I really love that analogy. That makes it so clear and like easy for people to understand, not necessarily is that how it's going to work. Maybe with a conversation, but not right off the bat. I know you're dealing with some mental load things right now. You mentioned that your little one is sick. How are you and your partner managing those roles?
Wallet is in the diaper bag.
I'm getting a live action view as to what we're talking about. So this is kind of great.
Sorry, what was the question again?
I know you guys are going through things where both of you are having to pick up the mental and physical load right now with your child being sick. How do
Mhm.
you guys manage the mental load? What have you done that's worked?
So the thing that I coach my clients to do is, and I hold them accountable to, and I have to hold myself accountable to, is having a weekly meeting.
Mhm.
It gets missed sometimes. I could easily see it not happening tomorrow, as we typically have it during a weekday
Mhm.
when she's at daycare, which she won't be at. But I think that a lot of times, like I said about the default roles that we fall into, it's really easy for either person to fall into those default roles if you're not having intentional conversations.
Mhm.
Even last night, I'm hoping I can get Alyssa to do like a podcast episode just talking this one out. So uh, she's been on high alert the past like 3 days of her puking, our
Mhm.
toddler,
Right.
and anytime we hear her coughing, her whole body is like awake at a minimum 5 seconds listening
Sure.
for the next noise, versus I've been at a conference for the past couple of days. So I think she has more medical background, so she recognizes sounds differently than I do.
Mhm.
But two, because she's been on high alert while it was just her, um, she's been she's been almost default taking on some of the emotional and mental load of managing a sick kid while also trying to get sleep. So I preface that with last night. Uh, she hears the noise. She doesn't even bother letting me hear. She says she's puking, and then she's up. She's like in the bedroom that's maybe 30, 40 steps away in like under 15 seconds. And I'm right behind her. And my first thought is, I think, and coming back to your question of like managing the mental load, is we had a not great experience, the two of us. I think she was very actively dealing with puking, thinking about temperature, thinking about the mental and emotional health of our child. I think oftentimes I feel a little bit disempowered in those moments, especially because
Mhm.
she turns into field general.
Sure.
Um, and sometimes I am not certain. When she is struggling and she's managing all of that emotional labor, doing the emotional labor of being nice to me falls by the wayside.
Sure.
And I think oftentimes I'm pretty good at putting that aside, saying, okay, she's stressed out. She's managing all the emotional labor of our kid. I can take a little bit of a beating while she's dealing with that. So I know that she's going through that. Um, Last night, I thought she was being particularly maybe mean or upset. Um, and it wasn't until the morning when we talked about it and did a little bit of a repair. We didn't really finish it,
Mhm.
but we did some pretty good acknowledgement of what happened, why it happened.
Mhm.
We don't necessarily have a move forward, but recognizing she really wanted someone to hold the emotional labor of what do we do next with, versus I know that I think that my pushback for her was, okay, so you want me to do that. And historically, I would argue 90% of the time, you don't like when I hover over you and
Mhm.
think with you. And so I went to the 90% default, which you've taught me to do, because you're like, stop hovering, go away. Like, I don't really feel like receiving that. So I just started working on all the pukey stuff. I started ripping her bed apart, pulling all the stuff off, getting it down into the kitchen, getting the chunks out, getting it into the washer.
Oh.
And meanwhile, she was not happy that I was doing that. And it was the 10% scenario where she wanted me to manage that with her. So
Yeah.
coming back to your question, I think one of the things that we do pretty well overall is having a conversation purposefully about it later. I think when your relationship's not going so well, it's really hard to have those conversations. And I think a lot of the guys that come to me are not typically in a great spot when they come to me. And so I typically recommend that people have a weekly meeting, start off really logistical. What do we get coming up in the calendar? Got this wedding coming up in a month and a half. Do we have our Airbnb set up? Do we have a hotel set up? Do we have the things? What's our travel plan? But I think a lot of guys are disempowered around what's going on in the home, especially with their partners that often default manage a lot of the mental and emotional labor of it. So I'm recommending that they come with a set of bullet points. I recommend at least 4 bullet points, feels like a good chunk. So you're showing up with a couple of things that you want to address. I know some of the guys have misinterpreted my words before, and they've come and said, hey, here are the 4 things, but what do you want to talk about?
Sure.
And then they put their wants, their communications to the backside. And I really recommend that they say, here are the 4 things that I want to talk about. You can add on anything else you want. So that it's like, I'm taking some charge of what I would like to discuss from a domestic labor standpoint. And I think the first couple weeks, sometimes they're a little bumpy. They're pretty awkward. They're like a business meeting. I think
Right.
in America, we're very corporate, we're very money driven, and we recognize that some meetings are really important for us to drive revenue. And anything that's not driving revenue oftentimes doesn't happen. And a lot of times we'll have those weird, almost silly meetings like, why are we here? Because it's standard operating procedure, because we know it's efficient for the business. And so what we don't do is value domestic labor. And so we don't have these communications in these meetings because they don't seem to be bringing in revenue.
Right.
So I highly recommend people kind of look at their home a little bit more like a business in this corporate thinking that we have, and develop standard operating procedures. Okay, our kid is sick. We need to immediately look at the next 4 days of childcare. How are we going to manage that? And more so saying, like, whenever our kid is sick, what are the mental steps that we go through? I know in our house, one of the things we have been looking at is that we use the Persist app, and we acknowledged that Alyssa is taking on significantly more childcare throughout the week. And we recognize that on Fridays, we do a good job of identifying, okay, who's going to start the day out? If you get to start the day, then you finish early, and vice versa. If you're doing childcare in the morning, then you're not doing it at like 4 to 6.
That's
so
great.
We said, you know what, we can actually do that pretty much 5 days a week, especially now that our toddler is going to be going to preschool, starts at like 2.8 years old or something nowadays. It's crazy. Which is coming up next month. So yeah, we've been looking to, I'm realizing I don't remember what the actual question was that I went on here, but
no, I think you answered it. I think it sounds like I was asking how you can manage mental load better and what you guys have done. I think from what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like it is communication and planning ahead. Like actually getting a, kind of like a step-by-step guide of what do we do in these situations, or who handles this, who handles that. Like actually having a plan in place and then talking about it, not just assuming the other person knows what to do, not just assuming that this role is yours and that role is his, actually talking about what that's going to look like. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I would say so. The more of those conversations that you can have, the better.
Yeah.
And I think the Fair Play book that we go through in the method, the book started with a viral post of her talking about the shit I do list, which as a mom was hundreds or like thousands of things, and she broke that into about 100 different responsibilities around the home. So I think that's a huge part of what we kind of break down in mental mastery is like, what are those things? And I know a couple of the guys like bought the cards before it started, and they saw all of the things under the COO of the home, which is all the operational stuff. And they're like, wow, I had not seen that we need to hire, again, back to the metaphors, like, who knew we need to hire people for all these different things, or like
Sure.
carry mental load for all of these different responsibilities?
Is that what it is? Just kind of like maybe a lack of awareness of what goes into the mental load and that's why it gets missed?
I think that's part of it. I think similar to what I was saying earlier of like, we don't value domestic labor in this
Mm,
country.
yeah,
It really in the world in a lot of
right.
ways. I've seen this stat a couple times, is that in economics, if like resources are traded, then it gets calculated within like economics. So
Right.
like if every single stay-at-home mom had a babysitter coming over to relieve her of her job,
Mhm.
that would account for about $1.5 trillion in our society. So
Wow.
because a lot of that is unacknowledged, I
Mhm.
think a lot of the mental load is not seen. It's
Sure.
just managed, and it's
Sure.
the other metaphor that I've used in the past couple months is looking at the mental load almost like the junk drawer in your kitchen, which I think everyone kind of has. I try to keep
Oh,
it to the
yeah.
everything drawer.
We have a big
And
one.
the 9 to 5 job is like your dishwasher. It's really clear what goes in it. It's really clear how it gets used. Dishes go in it. Silverware goes in it. It gets run at a similar time every day, hopefully.
Right.
There's actually a right and a wrong thing to put in there. Um, the everything drawer, not so much. So like the dishwasher, you have pretty clear guidelines for what its value is,
Yeah.
what it, like, similar to a 9 to 5 job. Like, you sign up, say, I will get paid this amount of money if I accomplish these tasks and
Mhm.
responsibilities.
Mhm.
Stay-at-home parents are like, the parents that are defaulting to all those extra roles. It's like the everything drawer, like, okay, the all of a sudden the Wi-Fi stopped working in our house. Who's going to call the phone bill? Well,
Sure.
that's the random highlighter that doesn't have a home, so it gets thrown in the everything drawer.
That makes so much sense. Another great analogy to help just really break down what this kind of invisible and I feel like not very talked about idea and concept is. Do you feel like mental load is starting to be talked about more? Do people need to talk about it more than we already do? Is it a new concept? Like, I just recently discovered it in the past year because I moved in with my partner and I was like, why am I so stressed all the time?
Mhm.
Why do I feel so exhausted? And then I started Googling, came across mental load, and realized, oh, that's what's happening with Bobby and I. So,
Yeah.
do people just need to talk about it more, gain more awareness?
Yeah, and first off, let me just like shout out to the OGs that have been talking about this far before I came on the scene. I think Eve Rodsky did a really great job talking about it in Fair Play. Gemma Hartley talked about it in Fed Up. Um, I know there have been one or two books that even came before them that talked about it, but I don't think popularized the term
Right.
mental load. Just like Caitlin Clark popularized the Deep Logo 3, but she wasn't the first to do it. So I think what I've been doing in discovering is talking about it from the guy's point of view and where I'm screwing up in my
Mm,
relationship, rather than being an expert on it necessarily.
yeah.
Um, for those that aren't familiar with my content, I try to throw myself under the bus first and say, this is where I added mental load to my wife today.
Mm,
Calling myself out first. And I know that a lot of guys that struggle to hear it, makes it a bit more palatable to see someone failing and then talking about and reflecting,
right.
rather
Right.
than,
It's not
saying,
blame. It's I'm
yeah,
with you.
yeah. That was me probably about a year and a half ago before I recognized I really wanted to make a difference in this. So coming back to your question, I think it's getting a lot more talked about. I know if you search mental load, you will find a significant amount of content to consume about it.
Mhm.
I know I have 173 videos talking about it.
So
And I know
many.
I dropped that word in the other probably 600 Instagram reels that I have out there. But yeah, I think since the pandemic, I think that's really put a spotlight on it.
So
And I
true.
think a lot of people really bored in quarantine and started making TikToks that were vulnerable and like showing the imperfections of their homes. And
Mhm.
TikTok created this really cool space where people were sharing vulnerably stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think that's when a lot more of this started to come out. was people just talking about their everyday experience. And I think that was a significant pain point that a lot of women felt that
Sure.
men were not.
Sure.
Is like he got to go into the bathroom to have his Zoom meeting versus, his wife was on the kitchen table trying to get the 3 kids into their Zoom calls while having her meeting too.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think it's incredible the content you create and like the education you're offering. And I also think it's incredible that you are doing it in a way of I'm not better than you. I struggled with this too. Here's what I'm doing. I'm
Mhm.
also failing at it plenty of times, but I'm still trying. Do
Yeah.
you find that men, when this is presented to them, maybe by you or by their partner, they get defensive? Or do you feel like they're receptive to it?
Between 97% of the time and 700% of the time they get defensive. I mean, we recognize that. Alyssa and I were looking back on, I think it was some video I had made, and she's like, yeah, like I brought this up to you years ago. And she said back in, I think it was 2020, maybe a year before our kid was born, I think she wanted to share an article with me. I don't know what article it was. We couldn't figure out what
Mhm.
it was, but she was too scared to share it with me because she thought I
Mm.
would get defensive.
Wow.
So
Wow.
I'm 100% a case study on this, is that Alyssa was too afraid to bring it up because I was
Yeah.
going to get hurt about it.
And why is that? Why do they get defensive? Why does anybody get defensive?
That is a good question. I don't know that it's actually been asked to me. I think it's because we feel like it's a lack of acknowledgement for what we do put into the
Mm,
relationship.
that feels spot on.
I think there's a lot of moments where, so, I had a significant following on TikTok in
Mhm.
2021 was my first like real start to talking about this. I didn't have the words mental load. I hadn't read Fair Play yet, but I was just sharing my experience of
Yeah.
paternity leave. And I remember, I had about 50,000 followers in 1 month. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden I had these eyeballs on me telling me I was a great dad. And there are a lot of moments where I started really believing it and leaning into
Mhm.
it. And I remember I made this video. It had, was it Megan Stallion's song,
I love it.
was it Hot Girl Shit or something?
There's so
Um,
many.
and so I remixed and said hot dad shit. And I just pulled out the Swiffer and then was like doing out the trash and cooking.
That's too good.
It was like, I can't talk right now. I'm doing hot girl shit. And then, she commented a couple hours later. She's like, you never pull out the Swiffer. I was like, what are you talking about? I do Swiffer all the time. But what I didn't see was the fact that she's the one telling me to do it.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
I think when mental load gets brought up, the acknowledgement of the execution of the task disappears.
Mhm.
And it's this invisible piece that we have a hard time seeing, is that there's the emotional labor of, someone's coming over in the next week and I don't want them to see our floors being gross, or, I feel guilty in general when our house is not the way that I see it on Instagram or the way that I grew up in my home. And so because you're holding the emotional labor of it, you're then putting a bunch of tasks on your list. Like, okay, this needs to be done on every couple of days, or,
Mm.
we had a big fluffy white dog, probably need to be done every other day. And then there's the execution, the physical task of it. And so I think the value of the physical task gets diminished.
Mm.
And that's why there's defensive, because it's like a loss of identity. It's a loss of ego and contribution
Sure.
to the home.
That makes a lot of sense. I've experienced that many times in my own relationship where it gets done, but I had to ask for it to get done. So
Yeah.
then I'm not grateful that it got done. I'm just annoyed that I even had to ask. Do you feel that sometimes women accidentally make it harder on their partner to step up to the plate by, diminishing or not noticing the things they are doing? What can we do to encourage you guys more to be better on our end?
So what the reason I don't typically make this into short form content is because the context of, I know y'all are already doing the emotional labor to be palatable, to be nurturing and kind when and how you say it. So uh, I don't give tips on short form anymore, because they always say, we're already doing this stuff. Stop giving us more work to do. So this is with the context of, I know you guys are already trying and some of you are banging your head against the wall with no success. Someone asked me back in 2020 when I was defensive
Mm.
and like, what did I need to hear back then? And I think my best answer is language.
Mm.
It's not embedded in our language. If you can start helping him feel proud of the mental load that he owns
Yeah.
and or emotional labor that he owns, and the consistent examples I give. So I know the mental load I always put on my boss before I was coach full time, um, was I felt like at least once a month he was reminding me to do my time card on Monday morning, because I didn't do it, Friday afternoon.
Hmm.
And so I think if I, if I was my boss, his name is Steve, and he were coming back to his wife and saying, "Man, that Zach, every freaking Friday, he always forgets his time card. I'm gonna have to remind him on Monday." And
Right.
I think there was one time period I actually didn't get paid in the time frame because of that. Um, if his wife had been saying to him, "Hey, it sounds like you really hold the mental load for this guy Zach," um, if he can start to see that as labor, that
Mm.
he holds that thought, that task list, and or I know there have been moments where if I think I've made a couple videos of this, they don't land, that they don't do very well because I don't think people get the total value of it. But
Sure.
I think that similarly, if it were they were coming home and if the wife were helping them acknowledge the emotional labor of, man, every time I step into the room with my boss and this high level salesperson, I always got to massage their ego, and I always got to like, yeah, like pay
Hmm.
attentively when I don't give a shit.
Right.
Wow, it sounds like you do a lot of emotional labor for
Yeah.
your colleagues. I think if you can start labeling that for them, they'll start seeing the work that they're doing, which they are
Mm.
doing. Um, I think once they have the vocabulary and they can distinguish emotional labor and mental load for what they do, they're
Yeah.
going to start being able to hear it, uh, in the context of the home, which is
Right.
where you're bearing the brunt of it.
Right. Feels much less accusatory or
Yeah,
demeaning once they can
that's right.
understand it in different contexts. That's really
Yeah.
great. And then last question, I think this one is really important for people to understand. I see it all the time in my own coaching when I coach men and women with their relationships, is that the fight that you're having is never about like that surface level thing. It's never about you didn't take the trash out. I'm mad at you for that. It's you didn't take the trash out after you told me you were going to take the trash out 10,000 times and you still haven't. So now I'm really frustrated and feeling like I can't trust your word. And I saw one of your videos and the caption said something about, having these conversations will save you from a zillion little moments that lead to resentment and bitterness and potentially the ending of the relationship. Can you just speak to that a little bit? Because I think it's so important for people to understand like there's something deeper going on that needs to be addressed. It's not about the trash.
Yeah, I think I, I was reading the book, How Your Marriage Ends, and he talks about, and I hear this in a lot of places, is that a lot of divorces, I think first time marriages end at like a 40% rate-ish, and it's like death by a thousand cuts, is what kills relationships. It's rarely, someone's cheating, although we'd like to think that because we see it in TV shows probably
Yeah.
way more than we see a divorce come from, being the Everyone Loves Raymond character, which Deborah should probably absolutely have divorced him. And that would have been great labeling and cultural, like, acknowledgement of that being an issue in our culture.
Right.
Sorry, that was a side note. But I think that that's like the reality of how divorces happen is there are all these small things, these lack of responsibilities, these
Mm.
lapses in integrity where we no longer trust our partner. Hey, yeah, babe, I'll do that for you. And then there's no time frame set. And then you come back to them and then the nag paradox is created because he said yes to it because
Right.
he wanted a gold star because it's exciting to say, yeah, I'll do that.
Mm.
And then they don't, do what they do in their day job to get it done and set a reminder or time block for it. Um, so it's a lot of those moments of lacking trust that get us to the point where, wow, all right, I can't trust him to do things that he says he's going to do. I also can't come back and call him out on it because he's going to say that I'm nagging him. So I don't know what the hell to do. I guess I'm just going to have to do it all myself. And that's heavy as shit. And
Oh,
it's really hard to come back and, talk to your partner and like acknowledge all these things without them getting defensive for the things that they aren't doing, that they can't see that they're not doing. Um, and I think that was a huge reason that led Alyssa and I to separate back in 2018. We had bought a house in 2017 at the very end. It was a 3-family home in Massachusetts. We went to renovate it, and we did a little bit more work up front than we had permitted for. Got a nice fat stop work sign on our front door, and both of us were going through the learning curve of like, how do you renovate a home? How do you do general like carpentry and contracting? But she was holding an insane amount of mental load for that. Meanwhile, I was very wrapped up in my 500 follower YouTube career at the time, and I just continued to let the mental and emotional labor fall on her. And at some point, where like she just recognized how generally resentful she was at me, one day at a time. One, all right, he's going to spend 2 hours on YouTube, but isn't calling back the electrical contractor, to this thing that he was more excited about me to get this multifamily home. So I think that stop thinking that cheating is going to be what ends your marriage, and start considering that mental load's the thing that's going to screw with it. Because it's like, getting, what is it? You're going to die by the frog boiling. I'm getting the metaphor wrong.
I don't even know. I'm thinking of the straw that breaks the camel's back, like that sort of thing.
That one works too. I think it's like they say that it must have been like a parable or something, but like there's a frog in like hot water.
I think my parents shielded me from that parable. It sounds a little traumatizing.
Maybe. But yeah, I guess the idea is that it dies because they never notice that the water is boiling, because it's like this slow creep, versus we all think that, it's going to be one big thing. It's not usually the big thing.
Right. It's the many, many little things that lead up to the big thing.
Yeah.
It makes perfect sense. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that with us, for answering all these questions. I know it's given me so much understanding and so much insight. It's also really helped me in my relationship to just even know what mental load is, and to be able to, like you said, have language to it and start to talk about it and learn how to tackle it better. Bobby and I do our weekly meetings, things like that. And it's really a game changer in a relationship. So I hope everybody listening to this can get those tips, and they can understand this better, and they can start to meet their partner in a more whole and healthy way to, create a healthy and lasting relationship.
Yeah.
So thank you. I appreciate it so much. I know that everybody listening is going to love it. And before I let you go, can you let everybody know where to find you so they can keep learning and studying mental load?
Sure. I would say my main platform is on Instagram, Real Zach Think Share, which originally was just Zach sharing what he was thinking about, and then it turned into a double entendre 2 years ago, sharing the thinking. But that's probably the main place to find me. If you're interested in my programming, the main 2 things we offer is Mental Load Mastery for Men, is a very small, intimate group of guys that directly work with me to take the mental load off their partners. And in May, we're starting Fair Play 101, which is a book forum. So there's 8 sessions, 13 weeks, where they go through the Fair Play books for men and women. Couples are highly encouraged to come. But I think some people, they buy the book, gathers dust on their nightstand for 6 months, and then wonder why they're a little bit extra pissed off at their partner. I think that's been an issue for a couple of the books that could have improved our relationship, that maybe we didn't have to go through separation if we had just committed to reading books. So I can leave a link for a free consult call.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, guys. Check him out. It is amazing, the content he puts out. It is very, very valuable. So, Zach, thank you so much for joining. It was great actually meeting you, chatting with you, and I'm so excited to share your wisdom with everybody.
Thanks for having me, Kate.